Hello there, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Copenhagen, the climate and the cost. Everyone knows saving the planet's going to cost, but the UN summit in Denmark is exposing deep divisions over who should pay and how much. Also, the continuing fallout in Dubai. We hear from a range of experts about mounting debt and disillusionment in what's become a crisis of confidence in the Emirates. And we hit the track with one of Formula One's big guns. Just what is the future of mega money in the world's major sporting events? So it's been all eyes on the Copenhagen Climate Summit this past week, an event supposed to find ways to stop the planet from overheating. But temperatures at the summit were the ones rising as a leaked document from the US, UK and Denmark pitched rich nations against poor. Basically, under the so-called Danish text, both industrialized and emerging countries would cut their carbon emissions. But the UN would be sidelined in future talks about climate change. Poor nations didn't like that. They blamed the developed world for this climate crisis, saying those countries' industrialization built their own fortunes while stealing others' futures. And so once again, it is down to the money, how to share the costs for fighting climate change. Have a listen now to the reasoning from the chairman of the G77. It's a loose coalition of developing nations from within the United Nations.
We are deeply concerned that the views and the architecture of the deal that the Danish Prime Minister is putting forward is not only unfair, but condemns the citizens of Africa, many islands and developing countries to a certain devastation. Further, it goes to establish what they define as fast-track money, the equivalent of $10 billion, as a financial package, which is literally a bribe. There's nothing to describe it, because when you compare the $10 billion with the risk that we are facing and the $1.1 trillion that United States and developed countries put forward in 2 weeks to address the financial crisis, you'll see that the developed countries are certainly not interested in addressing this grave risk that humanity faces.
So the question is, and frankly this is always the question, what is it actually going to cost to tackle climate change? Well, economist Nicholas Stern, in his report for the British government in 2006, said the world needs to spend 1% of global GDP. At that time, we're looking at $301 billion. But if governments were to dither and let the issue fester, the cost would rise between 5 and 20 times. Worst case scenario, in a decade's time, it'd be $5.96 trillion. Kind of a hard number to imagine, so try this instead. The cost of climate change would be $917 for every man, woman and child on the planet. The flip side, according to the Stern report, if nothing was done, was that the global economy would in fact shrink by 20%. Well, billionaire investor George Soros has a plan for paying for climate change, and that is to dip into the pockets of the International Monetary Fund. Remember, early in the year, an extra $250 billion was made available for so-called special drawing rights, SDRs. But there's still $150-odd billion sitting there, and Soros thinks climate change would be the perfect recipient. Well, I'm pleased to say that joining us from Copenhagen is the man himself, George Soros. Thank you for your time, sir. Where did you get the idea for this green fund? We've known the IMF money's been sitting there. Where did the idea come from?
Well, I've been working on it because when the SDRs were distributed, I realized that there is this money that is of no use to the ones who were credited with it, and I've been looking at various ways to put them for productive use. But then I always ran into the problem of who is going to pay the interest. And if the countries have to pay the interest, then they have to charge it to their budgets, and you actually haven't accomplished anything. And then I combined this with the gold of the IMF, and the fact that the transaction has actually been consummated has really made it very real and doable, because what I'm proposing is merely to do for $100 billion what has already been done for $4 billion.
Were you surprised then that no one came up with this idea before? I mean, the money's been around, or at least it was made available back in April, if I'm correct, back at the G20 summit in London.
No, because it was actually proposed on the eve of the G20, and actually President Obama embraced it. He was excited about it, and told his assistant to give him a report, and the assistant said that's not doable because we would have to pay the interest, and therefore we would have to charge it to the deficit like any other commitment. So that killed it at that time. But as I say, I've overcome that difficulty now by invoking the IMF into the transaction.
Are you getting a good reaction from people there at the summit in Copenhagen?
I think it has legs. I think there's quite a lot of enthusiasm in the NGO community, and I've talked to some of the developing countries, and I think that I don't want to quote them, but they said the SDRs definitely have to be part of this of the outcome. So I think it's going to fly.
Just a final thought from you, Mr. Soros. This leaked proposal which came out earlier in the week, the $10 billion a year plan. What did you make of that one?
Well, I wasn't here, but I think it was a little bit of an embarrassment for the Danish government that is very eager to have some positive result, and felt that the UN process, where communiques discussed and the disagreements are put into brackets, and there are apparently 1,000 brackets, so they felt that there will be no communique, and so they wanted to have one, and that's what they were working on.
George Soros, we thank you very much indeed.
And then leaked and created.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us. Well, when we talk about some of the world's biggest polluters, China is up there in the top 2, along with the United States. Now, China would like the US to make some deeper carbon cuts, but China itself is accused of not doing enough to contain its use of coal. Beijing insists it's striving to improve energy efficiency, but Melissa Chan's been finding out how those measures are affecting the coal-rich Shaanxi province.
Coal country and the mining boomtown of Ningwu. For years, the people here have benefited from their great source of wealth. In areas so rich in coal, people say all you have to do is strike the earth anywhere to find it. But the boom years are over. These men tell us they stand in the cold all day hoping to find work. They're hungry. As many as 80% of people here are now unemployed. And this is why. Hundreds of mines have been shut down by the government. Many were dangerous, but coal is also China's biggest source of pollution. And the government now wants to clean up its act.
They told us at the front gate that this mine has been closed for a year, but we came round the back, and it looks like there's still a secret, small-scale operation going on.
It's the only way for mine owners to beat the system. Across the province, over the last year, the government has seized mines, one after another, causing economic chaos in its wake. You're looking at the only place in China with negative GDP growth this year. Economically depressed, Shaanxi province's GDP went minus 4.4%, in contrast to the rest of the country's positive 8% growth. Taxi driver Zhang Yichun takes us around town. Everything, he says, is about coal.
We have no other industries here. Everything depends on coal. There's not even farming for us to be self-sufficient.
It's a stark decision. Do people breathe healthy air and see blue skies, or lose their economic means and starve? It is going to be a question China as a developing country will face here in this town and countless other places like it.
Why should the people in Shaanxi take on this kind of sacrifice? But this is a kind of part of the determination and commitment made by the national government, and we have to just make it happen. This is a really tough period that the country literally is going through now. And I'm hoping with more understanding, with more support from the international community, even sympathy.
The country wants to show the world it's serious about cleaning its air and tackling global climate change. But here in Ningwu, that's little consolation for the now jobless workers.
Counting the Cost returns in a moment with the latest on the Dubai financial crisis, and yes, it is more bad news. Plus an interview with the boss of Williams Formula One as we look at how sport has fared in this recession, who's cut back, who's spotted an opening. Are the days of mega sports sponsorship numbered? That and more in a moment.